The lecture hall of Orison Interplanetary University shimmered with blue-white hololights as students from 20 civilizations gathered to study the most brutal siege ever recorded. The fall of Bastion 71, Professor Zarek's deep metallic voice echoed through the dome. Historians estimate, he said, projecting images of burning walls, that Bastion 71 held for 6 hours, longer than predicted because an unidentified human delayed the breach of the main gate, the students murmured. 6 hours was an eternity in siege time. The gate itself was a titanium alloy slab weighing 40 tons, one laser blast away from collapse. Whoever held it must have been a titan, a genetically enhanced super soldier, a war mech pilot, something extraordinary. What kind of human was it? Asked a Xeran cadet. A commander? A cybernetic fighter? Unknown, the professor replied. The soldier left no record. The body was never found, only fragments of armor and a burned ID card without a rank. A ripple of disappointment spread. They wanted heroics with faces, holograms, medals. In the back row sat an old human man wearing a faded janitor uniform, leaning on his mop. He attended the class daily, unnoticed by most. His badge simply said E. Hartley, Maintenance. When the professor ended with, "Scholars still debate how the gate was held," a few students laughed. A reptilian Takari student hissed, "Maybe it was a malfunction, or a myth," another said. The janitor shook his head with a quiet chuckle. A Illyrin student turned. "Something funny, old human?" The man straightened slowly, joints cracking like old wood. His eyes, cloudy but piercing, held a memory older than the lecture itself. "You're studying that siege," he said softly, his voice thin but steady. "The one at Bastion 71. Professor Zarek nodded politely. "Indeed. A mystery of military history." The janitor tapped his mop against the floor. "Mystery, huh?" He exhaled a long, tired breath. "Strange thing is, you're all guessing." The students blinked, because the old man's next words fell like a hammer in the silent hall. "I didn't just study that siege," he said. "I held the gate." The hall erupted in confused chatter. A few students laughed outright. A human janitor? Claiming to be the unknown defender? Impossible. Professor Zarek raised a metallic hand. "Let the man speak." The janitor stepped forward, leaning heavily on his mop like a cane. "Name's Elliot Hartley. Back then, I wasn't a janitor. I wasn't even supposed to be in that fortress. Just a supply runner." A Xeran cadet frowned. "A civilian?" "Mostly," Elliot said with a shrug. "Never passed combat training. Knees were bad even when I was young." The students exchanged glances. This old man couldn't even lift a power rifle now. "Then how?" a Takari student said mockingly. "Did you hold a 40-ton industrial gate during a war?" Elliot smiled sadly. "By accident, and because everyone else was dead." He told them how Bastion 71 had already lost communications, how the enemy forces, merciless Dravok, shock troops had breached the outer walls. Soldiers were retreating inside when an explosion sent a shockwave tearing through the corridor. "I got thrown across the supply deck," Elliot said. "By the time I crawled up, half the unit was gone." The hologram shifted to match his tale. Fallen soldiers, collapsing beams, burning crates. I heard screaming near the gate. When I reached it, the autolock was damaged. The maintenance rods were failing. The blast doors couldn't fully seal. "And the soldiers guarding it?" a student asked. Elliot's jaw tightened. "All down. Some injured, some worse." He knelt beside one wounded officer in memory. The man had grabbed Elliot's vest and whispered, "Stall them. Buy time. Reinforcements need minutes. Anything helps." Elliot lifted his trembling arms. "I didn't have armor. I didn't have training. Just a maintenance suit and a broken shock baton." "So you ran?" one skeptical cadet guessed. "No," Elliot whispered. "I braced myself against the failing gate. I used my body like a human lock." Students stared. "You physically held it shut?" "With your arms?" Elliot nodded slowly. "With my arms. With my back. With everything I had." The hall fell into stunned silence, because against every calculation, every record, every theory, the man standing before them wasn't a soldier, a hero, or a legend. He was a janitor, and he had stopped an army. Elliot's voice grew quieter but sharper, like steel sanded thin. The Dravok weren't patient. Once they realized the gate's mechanism was compromised, they tried to force it open manually. He showed them with his hands, a shaking reenactment of metal, groaning under pressure. "You ever feel a whole army pushing against a door you're holding?" he said. "Feels like a god itself is trying to crush you." Students gulped. My boots slid on the floor. My shoulders went numb. My bones screamed. I could hear them outside, shouting, firing, trying to cut through. Professor Zarek whispered, "But the historical log said the gate lasted 40 minutes longer." "It lasted 62, Professor," Elliot corrected. "Every second carved some years off my life." He described the pain, not glorified, but real. After 5 minutes, I couldn't feel my arms. After 10, my back burned like fire. At 20, I started coughing blood. A young Denari student trembled. "Why didn't you let go?" "Because behind me," Elliot murmured, "were medics treating wounded soldiers, civilians hiding, engineers trying to reroute power. I wasn't holding the gate for honor. I was holding it for the people who still had something to live for." He closed his eyes, remembering. At 30 minutes, the enemy brought a battering device. Every strike cracked something in me. He tapped his ribs. "These 3 never healed right." At 50 minutes? His voice faltered. I wasn't standing anymore. My legs gave out. So I wedged myself under the gate, using my back as the last brace. The students stared at him in horror, awe, disbelief. And when the reinforcement cannons finally came online, Elliot said with a weary smile, the Dravok retreated. Gate stabilized. The fortress held. He paused. I crawled out. Thought I was dying. Woke up days later in a hospital wing with no visitors. No medals. No rank to pin them on. He shrugged. So I went back to what I knew. Cleaning floors. Fixing lights. Keeping things running. The hall didn't move. The textbooks had never recorded the man who saved thousands. Until now. The silence stretched long as the weight of Elliot's words sank in. The alien cadets who had laughed earlier now stared at him as if seeing a new species. A Yillaren student whispered, "Why didn't you tell the military? Or historians?" "I did," Elliot said with a small laugh. "Nobody believes a janitor saved a fortress. People prefer legends, big shiny ones. Not old broken men." A Zyran cadet stood abruptly. "Professor, if he's telling the truth, then our entire understanding of the siege is wrong." Professor Zarek, usually analytical to a fault, actually looked shaken. "Mr. Hartley, may I examine your medical records?" "Sure," Elliot said. "Last doctor said my spine looks like it wrestled a cargo hauler." The professor accessed a scanner, and within seconds a hologram appeared, showing compressed vertebrae, microfractures, healed impact trauma, and scarring matching blunt force pressure. The hall gasped. "This pattern," Zarek whispered. "This only occurs when extreme weight is applied over prolonged duration. Equivalent to a failing steel gate." The students stared. The janitor hadn't lied. A Takari cadet bowed deeply. "Forgive us, Elder. We mocked you." Elliot waved them off. "No need for worship. I didn't hold that gate alone. Plenty died trying before me. I just happened to last long enough." "But, sir," a human student said softly, "you saved thousands. Entire fleet divisions owe their survival to those extra minutes." Elliot shrugged again. "Funny thing about heroes, they're usually just scared people doing something stupid because no one else is left." The professor stepped closer. "If you permit, Mr. Hartley, I'd like to record your testimony for historical preservation." For the first time, Elliot hesitated. "Why now?" "Because truth," Zarek said, "must be remembered, even when it comes from unexpected places." The students nodded. Elliot exhaled slowly and smiled. "All right. If you want the story, I'll give it." But none of them were prepared for how it would end. Elliot finished recounting the last details, the evacuation, the recovery, the nameless years of labor after war. The hall was silent, not out of discomfort, but reverence. A young cadet raised her hand timidly. "Sir, do you regret it?" "Holding the gate? Nearly losing your life for people who never remembered your name?" Elliot looked around the hall, at the bright young faces, the shimmering hollow screens, the peace that existed because old wars had been won. "Regret?" he mused. "No, I'm glad I held it. Even if nobody knew." His eyes softened. Heroes aren't remembered because people write about them. Heroes are remembered because the world they saved keeps breathing. The hall absorbed that. But sir, another student asked, why become a janitor? Why not retire somewhere peaceful? Elliot chuckled. Because after the war, all I wanted was purpose. Quiet purpose. Keeping places safe, clean, working. A gate doesn't always need holding. Sometimes it just needs fixing. Professor Zarek approached him with a ceremonial gesture. Elliot Hartley, I will officially submit a correction to the Galactic Military Archive. History will know your name. The entire class applauded, some even standing. Elliot raised a hand. Before you do that, let me tell you something important. The students leaned in. Strength isn't muscles, he said softly. Courage isn't glory. And sometimes the person who saves the world isn't the strongest, fastest, or most skilled. His grip tightened on his mop. Sometimes it's the one who refuses to step aside. A hush fell. Elliot smiled faintly, tired, proud, unbroken. And that's how I held the gate. The students would remember his story forever. The professor would publish his testimony across academic circles, and the galaxy, for the first time, would know the name of the forgotten defender. Elliot Hartley, the janitor who stopped an army. The man who proved that even the quietest life can echo like thunder through history.